when I criticize wokeness or I have a go at it, people go to me, well, you don't even know what it means. What does woke mean? Define woke. So can you define woke for me?
Yeah, that's a common tactic they use to try and stump people. They play around in sort of the language and like the shifting definitions. So I think we could define woke a few ways. One is by what it looks like and how it actually behaves, and second by the underlying ideology behind it. So I would say if we were to try and point at woke, woke is the current iteration of social justice advocacy that is focused on identity and power. That would be everything to do with things like critical race theory, radical gender theory. It makes everything about race, sex, gender identity, disability status, and it is very concerned with systemic power, and that it cashes those things out in terms of racism, sexism, homophobia, etc., etc. That would be the point at it. I think the underlying ideology is a blend of postmodernism and critical theory that comes out of the neo-Marxist school, particularly the Frankfurt School of neo-Marxism. And I think over time, those ideas mutated, changed, were blended together, and they formed an alloy. A really nice way to think about woke, actually, just as we're sitting here, is you think of it not as it's not like a well-engineered building. It's more like an academic stew. So you grab a little bit of Marxism from there, and then you grab a little bit of, postmodernism there, and you grab a little bit of Ibram Kendi from here, and some Robin DiAngelo from there, a little bit of psychology here, and then you blend it all together. Toss in some critical race theory, toss in some gender theory. Delicious wokeness. The activists are not like scientists or engineers carefully engineering something. They're more like cooks in the kitchen cooking up woke ideology.
It's very poisonous. I mean, the way you describe it is exactly right. It deserves the sort of ridicule it has, and there is an accidental. You're sort of implying a sort of accidental mishmash of the week's philosophical leftovers into some ideology, but it is very targeted.
Yeah.
And it is quite difficult to define. What would you say were you're talking about Marcuse and the Frankfurt School and all of this sort of stuff. Where would you say its first and most sort of profound iteration came from? Where's its origin?
I don't think there's a single seed that leads to the forest of wokeness. I think there's a few different developments, but if you want to look at its absolute underlying structure, its underlying, I guess, premise is that it wants absolute freedom from constraint. It sees society as a sort of prison which is forcing us to believe things and to behave in ways that we don't want to behave. And the idea for them is to fix and rearrange and restructure society so that everyone is absolutely equal. It believes that inequality, particularly of power, and particularly of what they would call systemic power, is the great evil of our time. So, if you want to trace it back, I think that with all ideas, you can trace it back forever, right? Like, I mean, if I wanted to trace Western civilization back, I would have to trace all the way back probably to Plato and maybe before then, as it is with wokeness. So I would start, I think the key thinker would be people like Marx, Rousseau, some of the romantic writers of that time, late 18th, early 19th century, early 20th century writers. And I think that that if you take Marx and you distill him down and his attitude and his mood and his approach, I think you could think of Marx as the first critical theorist. I mentioned earlier that comes out of the critical theory of the Marxist school. So critical theory is one of the methods that the academics who forged wokeness used, and Marx is generally considered to be the first critical theorist. Before for critical theory. There was something called critical philosophy, which comes out of Kant, but that's a little bit different. It was really formalized, critical theory was, in an essay in 1937 by Max Horkheimer, who was a member of the Frankfurt School and was a neo-Marxist. And he laid out the difference between critical theory and what he called traditional theory. So traditional theories would be like the theory of gravity, the theory of evolution, quantum theories of physics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are traditional theories. They're purely descriptive and cause and effect. Critical theory has a moral valence to it. Critical theory asks, why is our society structured the way it is? Who structured it that way? Whose interests are served in structuring it that way? And who benefits? That's what critical theory is doing.
So it's a narrative theory as opposed to a what's the word? Epistemological. Is that the right word? No.
Yes. It is not. It's not a theory of truth. It's a theory. It's much more moral and normative than it is descriptive. It's not merely trying to describe facts. It's got a moral valence to it.
Yeah.
And that moral impulse is, broadly speaking, in line with a sort of Marxist idea of what it would mean to be of liberation, and what Marxism would, or neo-Marxism would have called emancipation. Freedom from the oppressive society. And so critical theory, the critical theory of society, seeks to understand society in a way that allows them to undo all of the oppression that they see in society, or that they believe exists in society.
Which was created, so their view is that society was deliberately created so that there was an oppressor and an oppressed.
They would say, well, I don't know if they would say it was deliberately created to be oppressive, but they would say that it is oppressive, and it was created and it was formed and forged and woven together according to the interests of certain people, and to the benefit of certain people, and to the detriment of others. And they would say, whether you meant to do it or not doesn't matter, you did it. And so that's the critical theory lens. I think it's a highly cynical. My friend James Lindsay on Twitter describes critical theory as nothing more than an excuse to read bad motives into people you don't like. Yeah. Because on the ground, that's functionally what it looks like. And so the critical theory, that's the moral valence, that's the anti-oppression, everything needs to be liberated, society is oppressive, people would be fine if not for the oppressive society, we need to be liberated from all of the oppression in society. So that comes from the critical theory, and that's also where their cynicism comes in, reading bad motives into people they don't like, seeing bad self-interest and bias in everything, seeing racism in everything. That comes from the critical theory side. And then the theories that they use regarding how society is actually built and function, their theories of language, their theories of how morality is built, their theories of how meaning works, that all comes from postmodernism. And although those two things might seem to be opposed, because postmodernism, at least in the 80s, 70s, I think, 80s and 70s, was denied the existence of meta-narratives, and critical theory and neo-Marxism is clearly a meta-narrative. Those elements from those two things, like I said in the stew, were blended together. They mixed them all together, and they formed this thing called woke. Eventually, through its various iterations and the way that it was incubated in universities, it was cooked up